Hey everyone, and a very warm welcome back to Talk Norwich City. It's Jack Reeve, joined alongside the brilliant Connor Southwell from the PinkUn, fresh off the return of Norwich City's pre-season tour. We'll hear all about that, plus much more, in hopefully a really exciting 20 minutes or so. It has been a very busy transfer window so far for Norwich City, ever since the sacking of Johannes Torp, really, where I think we last spoke to Connor. So Connor, plenty to get through. How are you? How have you been?
I'm good. Yeah, really good. It's crazy. And it always feels crazy. Like the start of July to the start of the season goes so quickly with pre-season and tours and whatnot. But yeah, excited, I think, for the start of the campaign. And hopefully that's the mood amongst the Norwich City fans. It certainly seems to be. So yeah, let's hope that optimism and excitement carries on deep into the season this year.
Absolutely. I mean, it feels remarkable, doesn't it, that Liam Manning yet to manage a competitive fixture for Norwich City, but it feels like we know lots about him. It feels like we've heard lots from him. It feels like we know how he's going to lead this this Norwich City team forwards. How have you kind of come to terms with the news of Liam Manning, becoming the head coach, and what have been your impressions of the early dealings with him so far?
Yeah, I mean it's funny as you know, Jack. Often in this world, June can be almost a dead month in football. Nothing really happens, and you have to get quite creative sometimes to create content, and that's definitely not been the case at Norwich City this year with a managerial change and 9 signings by the end of July. For sort of context, I think Ben Krasny was their second on like the 28th of July last season. So goes to show the different world. But yeah, look, Liam's I think, and you said there's been many touch points with him, and I think from all of those, I've come away thinking what a driven, ambitious young coach. And I think you look at his pedigree in the game, what he's achieved. I think people will point at Bristol City, but actually, I think I'd look back even at that season he had in Belgium with Lommel, where he improved them. MK Don's first year as well, inherited a very good Russell Martin team, but still had to get a tune out of them and did that. Second year was a little bit more difficult after lots of players left, and Oxford for the 8-month spell he was there converted them from kind of lower mid-table side into one that was inside the top 2. Bristol City, likewise, mid-table team. Nigel Pearson did a lot of the building of the foundations, and he pushed that on and got them into the top 6 for the first time in a long period of time. So there is a really proven track record, and I think maybe I'm saying this with a bit of hindsight, but I think certainly the red flag maybe where Johannes Torp is always when they only do it at one club. And the question is it actually the coach, or is it actually just a really good organisation? And maybe it's still difficult to say which one it is with Johannes, and it could be both in truth at this stage. But I think Liam has a track record of improving teams at every level, and like you say, I think he's been very clear. And I think as well that the hire itself was ambitious, and I think, as if I was an Norwich fan looking at it, you wanted to see a clear upgrade. And it's important as well not to overcorrect, because I think when something goes wrong, you can lurch desperately in the other direction. I think Liam Manning feels like a step, but hopefully a step in the right direction, as opposed to a complete overcorrection in terms of the bits that Johannes Torp got wrong. So hopefully all of that will come together. I like what I've kind of seen. I like what I've heard from him. I think it's clear that the early weeks of pre-season, as we're speaking now, has been spent trying to correct the sort of out of possession and defensive stuff. And I think all of that has been pretty solid. So yeah, hopefully good signs. And obviously the fact he's a Norwich boy helps all of that. With the connection with the fan base and whatnot, who feel to me like a fan base that are just ready to love again, really. So hopefully he's that man, and hopefully he can build a team that forges that relationship with the fans again.
And it does feel as if, I mean, the head coach hire is so important and will be critical to the success or the failure of Norwich City this season. But it feels like kind of the excitement with most transfer windows is based around the signings and who you end up selling. And look, we don't really know if any of these players are any good as of yet, but the way that Norwich have gone about the signing of 9 players so far, the considerable money they've spent in relative terms in the Championship has been impressive. And the endeavour and the intention to go out there and try and make a squad. We knew that this summer was going to be busy, and we knew that there was going to be squad turnover. Did you expect it to be this busy and get out of the traps this quickly?
Definitely not the pace of it. And I think irrespective of the success of those additions, I think the pace of it is incredibly impressive when you compare it with other teams in the Championship. Obviously, I know Swansea were kind of level pegging at one stage. Birmingham have clearly done some good business as well. But I think the sense I've got kind of speaking to people and listening to Ben Napper in public forums is last season really lit a fire. I think underneath him and underneath those in the football club, there was real upset in the way that it went, and particularly given the fact that they felt teams like Liam Manning's Bristol City were in the playoffs when perhaps they weren't pound for pound, player for player, better than what Norwich City were. And it felt like a collective failure. And I think that pressure, those criticisms, those questions that have justly been asked, I think has probably roused a response. And that's immensely positive, I think, because that is what you want to see from a football club. And I think you think of Stuart Webber and you think of Paul Lambert at their best. It was always when they had this sense of purpose and this sense of idea. I like what they've done in the window. I think there's been some really good calculated risks in there. Ultimately, they are still risks, no matter how calculated they are. And I think all of it has been supplemented by, as we've just discussed, a coach who understands what the Championship is, the rigors of it, how to get success, not just in the Championship, but in the EFL more broadly, and how to adapt and maybe be a little bit more flexible than his predecessor was in games. And the risk that they're taking with the players is supplemented, I think, by the fact that in Liam Manning, they've got a coach that they hope is a steady pair of hands that has a really proven track record of improving teams. And if you improve teams, then individually you improve players, which again was a criticism of Johannes Torup, that he wasn't able to improve more of those assets. So I think when you combine all of that, it is an exciting mix that Norwich are building. Doesn't mean it's going to be a successful one. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be one that maybe can compete towards the top end of the Championship. But I think even the fact that it has the potential to do just that, and as you say, the intent, the way they've acted, the way they've conducted themselves in certain deals, the speed of them, the ability to go out and pinch a player from another club's nose. I mean, that's not typical for Norwich City. That's not normal. I know you've said that on a few things as well. And I think it speaks to probably the alignment that's all the way up, because it allows them to move really quickly on deals. You look at Matthias Chris Gordon or Papa Amadou Diallo. You can compare that to maybe other clubs that were in the race that just didn't have that alignment from top to bottom, so they're not able to move as quickly, and that creates a drag. And Norwich City, because they are there and they've done a lot of work on players and they've produced these massive data profiles, and they've got the support of the ownership, they're able to move a lot quicker. So I think all of that has made it quite an exciting concoction this summer. But of course, it'll be, it's one thing being excited in July. Everyone thinks they can win the league at this stage. It's actually, can they sustain that excitement into October, November, December, January? That's the real challenge, I think, for Norwich City this year.
And I guess something that we're all still coming to terms with somewhat, Connor, because we've been used to, certainly in our lifetimes, of Norwich City being a selling club, really. And if we've bought in big players, it's often come off the back of a big sale. It's been different this summer, and it comes back to that ownership question. And it feels like it's the first window with Mark Atanasio and Norfolk Holdings Group where that is starting to have serious influence. We were both at the fan forum event, and there was a brilliant, I can't quite remember the exact comments, but it was the discussion around the Matthias Chris Gordon signing, and the considerable money spent on him, and Atanasio was kind of asked, and he just kind of shrugged it off. He was like, "Is it big money? I don't. It's not to me." And it was a completely sincere response, but it was like, no, we're here to play, and we're here to play big, and we have lofty expectations, and we will do everything that we can to back Ben Napper and his recruitment team. And that's exciting. I'm still not used to it. I'm still expecting us to, when we're in for a player, for it to not happen or to not have the funds. It's a different Norwich City now.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And again, that speaks to some of the alignment I spoke about. But ultimately, underpinning it is the fact you've got an ownership group who, they haven't come to pot around in mid-table in the Championship. They want to get this club and they want to do it for themselves, and that's a good thing. But they want to do it for the fans, and they want to do it for the project, and they really believe in what they're doing here. They believe they can scale up a data department that is one of the best in the country outside of the top six. And we had Mark Atanasio on our podcast and sort of puts him about Brighton and Brentford. And actually, there's an ambition to overtake those guys and to try and do something even better than that. And look, that takes capital, that takes resource. And when you've got a guy there who obviously has the career that he has and is dealt in £50 billion worth of loans, he understands money. And I think he's willing to support that, not without cause. And it's not blank checks. They have to be calculated decisions that are in keeping with the strategy that Ben Napper outlined when they appointed him. But I think it has been. I think the signs, like you say, Chris Gordon was a wonderful bit of transfer engineering in terms of how they produced that and how they pulled that rabbit out of the hat. But even Diallo, one that they're very excited about. And I think, it's one thing having finance, but you've still got to be able to convince the players. And that's where, the sales pitches of Ben Napper, of Liam Manning, of Lee Dunn and his recruitment team is so important, because you can have, all these dossiers and you can be looking at Jakov Medic and compiling all his data in the Bundesliga too and producing how that will translate to the Championship. But if you haven't got a good sales pitch, if you can't sell him that move, all of that work is redundant and it's pointless. So you're right, there absolutely is a change, and we haven't seen a world in which Norwich City have bought players before they've sold. It's always been the other way around. But, and I think this is worth mentioning, it still is about selling assets and selling players. And that is negative if you're a fan, because everyone wants to keep your best players. But actually, I think there is a positive element to selling talent, because every team does it first and foremost. Maybe irrespective of Real Madrid and maybe Liverpool now, even though I know they didn't sell Trent Alexander-Arnold, but they still lost him. So there's a case there even of a big club in that way. So I think it can be productive, because actually without a Borja Sainz going to Porto, without a Gabriel Sara going to Galatasaray, then maybe when you have those conversations with Chris Gordon, and you sell him this vision of you come to Norwich, you play really well, you score goals. What about the next bit? Oh no, we won't let you take the next step. Oh, okay, no, I'll leave it then. So that is all part of the package. And actually, Norwich now have, with Sainz, with Sarah, maybe even with Sargent later this summer, although obviously we're all desperately hoping he stays at the club, is that sense of you come to Norwich, you play really well for 2 years, and we'll push you into the Champions League or the Europa League or to a top level European club. That's a very strong sales pitch. No one else in the Championship at this moment in time has that. And it's helped Norwich get a lot of business done because of it. And of course, that benefits the club, because players come in, they perform, they impress, they sell, and then you sign the next crop and you sign them for a slightly higher fee, and incrementally you build. And that's what Brighton have done, and that's what Brentford have done. So I think there is a real strategy here. It's ambitious, it's exciting. I think it's one that a lot of the fan base can support, but ultimately it will involve selling players. And maybe it's just flipping that switch slightly as a fan to say, actually, it is. I know it's hard, and everyone wants to keep Josh Sargent and see him score goals in the Championship and Borja Sainz, but actually it can help the next ones coming along that hopefully will develop and improve to be even better.
Well, at time of recording, Connor, and I keep having to say that, because although we can turn these videos around quickly, the Norwich City transfer and recruitment team can turn transfers around quicker than I can turn around videos. At time of recording, Josh Sargent is still in the building. Now, you say there that selling is positive, and of course, it's a natural cycle of a football player at a club. But maybe is the selling pitch, well, why don't you come on the journey with us? You don't want to go to Burnley and go get into the Premier League and come straight back down. Let's go to the Premier League with Norwich City. Why go to, a bottom half Bundesliga side when you can stay with Norwich City? I'm kind of take that with a pinch of salt. But the fact that Josh Sargent is still here, look, he may still go. He probably does still go. The fact that Marcelino Nunes is still here, there's been nothing said about him. That's surely positive. And the fact that Norwich do maybe have a bit more fighting power to keep these players at the club now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the difference is that, in previous seasons, if they hadn't sold Josh Sargent, they would be not close to financial disaster, but it would put a real limitation on what they could do. They had to sell, because it was about, as you said earlier, it was about selling before they could buy and strengthening the squad. That goes back maybe even to the Emi Buendia sale, where, irrespective of how it happened, and clearly there are lots of different accounts around that, it did happen, and it kind of funded what Norwich were able to do from an incoming perspective. If they don't sell Josh Sargent this summer, it's not Armageddon. It's not a situation where, they're on the precipice again, kind of looking deep down and wondering kind of how they fill black holes. That's not the case for the reasons that we've stated. Mark Atanasio is happy to fund that. But equally, again, and this is where it's complex, there's a player there who will have a wish and will have a desire to play at the very top level. And as soon as you maybe show that you're a club that isn't, and I'm not saying Norwich are doing this, but if you're a club that theoretically says, actually, no, we're not going to sell you and we're going to make you see out your contract, word spreads quickly in football. And it doesn't just impact Sargent, it impacts some of those who are in the dressing room who say, well, okay, well, if I get to the level where, if I'm anti-Cianats and I have a 20-goal season and then suddenly I've got opportunities to move higher up and this club is going to block me, that has an impact deeper in the dressing room, but also to the potential recruits. And this is the balancing act of where Norwich are at the moment, because to attract new recruits, you have to have real evidence that you're willing to sell them as well. And that's where the compromise has to come in. Obviously, with him as well, I've said this throughout the summer, but I think, and I'm not, but if I was advising Josh Sargent, and if I was Josh Sargent's representative, particularly ahead of the World Cup, after 3 years of Championship football, I'd be saying, look, mate, you've got to get yourself to a higher level and prove that you can do it there, because that is going to be the thing that probably pushes him back into Mauricio Pochettino's thoughts at this moment in time. And yeah, I was really surprised when obviously we broke that story about him turning down the Bundesliga and Wolfsburg, because a lot of work had gone into that. There was some German reports that he'd flown out there earlier this summer. That chimes with what we were told. And ultimately, if you're Wolfsburg and if you're Norwich, you don't get that far down the line if you don't think the player's interested. So something happened, something changed. We may never know what that was or who it was. But I think what is good, and this is the point that I've made, is irrespective throughout it, he has handled himself tremendously well. You speak to Liam publicly, privately, and he makes that point. Been good around the group. There's been some excellent speeches delivered in the changing room from what I gather. And, you only have to look maybe at some of the players in the last 12 months who didn't go down a similar route when there was a move on the table or when they wanted away and they tried to push it and force it. And I think Josh Sargent really respects that relationship he has with Norwich fans. I remember there was I can't remember exactly what the game was, but it was just after an international break, and during the international break, an interview had been published with him where there were some quotes that I think were maybe playfully played with and playfully kind of edited to suit a certain story that maybe wasn't the one that he necessarily felt was going to be told. And he was very quick. I think the next game he was the player post-match, and he was very quick to wanting to address that because he cherishes that relationship that he has with the fan base. So I think that tells you all you need to know about Josh Sargent. And hopefully, as this gets deeper through the summer, irrespective of what happens from here, that kind of amicable right way of leaving, as Gabriel Sara did, can, if it does come to pass, that is the way it happens. I still think it will. I still think the most likely outcome is he leaves. But if come September the 1st, Josh Sargent is a Norwich player, I personally wouldn't have any concerns that he would knuckle down and hopefully hit the ground running in the Championship again.
And I guess that, the positive thing as a fan, at least, even if these players do go, they're going to go for the right price, and the likelihood is that money will be reinvested in some capacity, whether it's this window or the next window. I mean, we're nearing the start of the season now, Connor, and nine signings so far. Granted, there's not been a whole lot of outgoings, but we had those players leave through their contracts kind of coming to a conclusion at the end of last season, so that there has been a bit of moving and shaking in that department as well. I'll chuck some names at you and see where we're at in terms of things potentially happening over the coming days and weeks. Pelle Matson has been a name that I've probably said more than most of my family members over the last few weeks. That defensive midfield situation seems one that they're looking to get some clarity on fairly soon. Are we any closer to learning about who our next midfielder might be?
Yes, I think we are. I think we're getting there, although it feels like we've been getting there for about 3 weeks. I mean, I first heard Pelle Matson's name in April, May time as one that Norwich City liked, and it feels like we're not really any further forward than we were then. Look, I think it's a very difficult and complex thing, because for the same reason we spoke about selling players a moment ago and holding firm on those, and you mentioned some of the players maybe who tried to take matters into their own hand, and it was important for Ben Napper to kind of make a stand against that and show that actually, no, even if you've kicked off, we stand firm. Here's our valuation. The problem is other clubs do that as well, and that's not to say Pelle Matson has kicked off. So I think they're close as time of recording, which is the 28th of July. Nothing is agreed yet. That obviously can change rapidly, but I think the clubs are basically now pretty much in the same ballpark. I think it's been interesting to read some of his quotes. He's clearly been very affected by the situation, and you read reports from the local press out there, and I don't think he's had the greatest pre-season, and maybe hasn't started the season that well. Was replaced as a starter in their defeat on Sunday. But yeah, look, he's a player they like. They've done a lot of work on him for a long period of time, and that's not something that you give up easily. And I think there's always been confidence that it would get done. Clearly, I don't know this for a fact, but the ESC, GBE, which are clearly like the work permit slots, which I'm not going to go into great detail into because I'll give myself a headache, but you can Google them if you need more info. But essentially, he would have been an ESC before he played in the Europa League qualifier. He's now a GBE, which basically permits him to have a work permit, essentially. So that is helpful from a Norwich City perspective. And hopefully, yeah, this is a crucial week because I think it's now in everyone's interest to try and get this done, and maybe from a silk ball. And again, it's not harmful for Norwich. I think that maybe the player is a little bit as is human nature, is maybe getting a little bit caught up in it and a bit fed up with all the questions that he's being asked about it. So yeah, he's one they like. If that doesn't happen, then they're ready to move on top pitch. I've always kind of felt that maybe he's a little bit of a backup option and you know, maybe a slightly different choice. But yeah, there's been a lot of work that's gone into Palamatz, and I think Norwich City would be extremely disappointed at this stage if they weren't able to get that one over the line. And I think it's worth saying as well, he wants to come, and I think he's told them pretty unequivocally that he would prioritise Norwich over pretty much anything else. So that's a sign of where we are at it. It's just those clubs need to get a breakthrough, and you know, those reports over the weekend suggest they're close, but you can be as close as you like until it's done, I think.
So that's the kind of midfield area. I see on the PinkUn app earlier, Norwich being linked with a Brighton forward. It feels as if I'm constantly in kind of two minds about whether we've got loads of attacking players, because I look at that front three and I go, well, even if Sargent, you know, does go, who, you know, does Chris Garden even start? Because you've got Ante Cianats and Jurisic and Diallo, and then suddenly going, oh my goodness, we're quite light in that area. So Norwich still clearly wanting some more reinforcements in that forward area. Abdullah Sima, the latest to be linked. I don't know too much about him, so we'll let you, fill me in on what's going on there.
Yeah, well, they've been in the market for I think we've put this for a while now, a kind of loan option on the left side. They've got Diallo in the building, which is excellent. There's loads of internal excitement about what he could be, but clearly at the same time, maybe a recognition that he's still 21. He was playing in League 2 last season. You're never quite sure how well and how quickly players can adapt from particularly overseas. The French league, I think, typically does translate quite well, so hopefully that is the case. But clearly there's a want maybe to add a bit of depth in that area. They've lost Lewis Dobbin, Onel Hernandez, Borja Sainz clearly as well. So yeah, there's a feeling that they're still maybe a little bit short across the attacking line as a whole. I know there's obviously been a lot of focus on the number 9 position, and clearly a lot of that hinges on Sargent's future. But it feels to me like there's been a more concerted effort probably to get versatility and to get players that are quite flexible and fluid in that area of the pitch. You take Chris Gordon, he feels pretty versatile to play any of those roles across the front three. Diallo as well, I think with his pace could do that quite easily. Ante Cianats is still a really interesting one for me. Where does Liam Manning see him? Sort of the soundings that you hear is maybe that he sees him more as a right-sided player than a number 9, which, you know, you throw that into the Sargent debate, and if he does depart, then I find it quite difficult, if that is the case, to see how they could go into the season without recruiting another number 9. So Sima, who has played central, left-sided, had a really good loan spell at Rangers, was in France last year and did pretty well in the top division for Reims, I think. So yeah, one of a number of options they're looking at. As Louis Koumas, and I know Mikey Moore was one that they considered as well, although it sounds like he's going to Rangers. So I think there's a lot of options. What I would say on that one is, by the nature of what it is, which would be a Premier League loan, I think it probably is going to take place later in the window, because Premier League clubs are still assessing their options and trying to get players in of their own. And sometimes you need different things to move before a player becomes available. So yeah, that one I'd probably expect to go a little bit later than maybe the defensive midfield option.
Okay. I won't throw too many more names at you, because I'm sure there's just a huge confusion in your head about who's who at the moment. You were obviously out in the Netherlands for pre-season. A slightly odd schedule with 2 games in the same day and etc. I was struggling to keep track of it back here. I mean, look, it's never wise to read too much into pre-season, but I guess what were the main takeaways for you, and what did you make of the pre-season schedule as a whole? I know we've got a couple more games this weekend before competitive action starts next week, but was it a productive tour, would you say?
Yeah, I think it was. You speak to people, and I know it wasn't maybe the schedule that Liam Manning wanted, but I think you've got to roll with it, and you've got to, play the hand that you're dealt, and that was the hand that he was dealt. I think there was a feeling that the camp was probably too long. 10 days to be anywhere for anyone is a long period of time. I mean, I was there for 8 days, and I think by Thursday you're kind of thinking, "Oh, blimey!" You're looking at the clock and counting down the days you've got, and I think, to be honest, the Saturday friendlies, the first one was so difficult against Olympiacos. Norwich rang them in advance. We're expecting them to play maybe a bit more of a mixed team than they did. They came up and they had a Ukrainian international up front who played in the Champions League, and a really good Norwegian left winger and an 18-year-old in midfield as 4 Greece caps. So probably wasn't the type of team and caliber of team that they were anticipating. But I actually thought in the first 45 minutes a very young Norwich City team were very good and very competitive without probably doing too much on the ball. The second half, it got away from them a little bit. And the Den Haag game just felt to me like a squad that was just mentally and physically fatigued and gone, to be honest. And, you had players cramping up in 70 minutes. And again, you can look at that either way. You can look at it as a fan and go, oh, no, they're undercooked. But equally, you have to wrap context around it. They've done loads of double sessions. There've been loads of focus. There hadn't really been any days off because where they were located was quite remote. So there wasn't a lot. If you could give players a day off, I'm not really sure what they'd go and do. So all of that kind of adds into it. But what I would say about that Den Haag game, and this is maybe picking it can be clutching at straws or picking a positive or whatever you like. But I think they weren't great, and that's fair. But what you would say is they didn't lose the game, and they didn't really. I mean, Dan Grimshaw produced an excellent save late on, but Kovacevic didn't really get tested. Grimshaw, beyond that moment, didn't really get tested, and I think that probably speaks to what Liam Manning has focused on over the first 3 weeks or so. It's been very much about out of possession, very much about their press, very much about their defensive structure. That's for obvious reasons, given their sort of rate of goals conceded last season, but also linked back to the first part of the discussion that we had. When you've got players like Kovacevic, like Medic, even Harry Darling, who kind of have shown throughout their career that they've got an error in them. If you can build a really solid structure, it doesn't half help with that. So Liam Manning, it feels like to me, is just trying to prevent and probably push up that floor a little bit. We saw it last year. Norwich were at their best, brilliant, intoxicating to watch, exhilarating, scored goals at will and put teams away at Carrow Road. The flip end of that was they were bad, and they were one of the worst teams in the Championship when they weren't on it, and that gap was too big. Liam Manning feels to me like he's trying to push that up to get a little bit more consistency. So even when they're not at their very best, there's a base level there that makes them competitive in every single Championship game, and they've still got those fundamentals of willing to run and having a really cohesive structure. And if you've got that balance and you can chip away, then that helps you when you're not at your best to get points. And Norwich City, they didn't. If they weren't on it, they didn't get points last season. So that's something he's trying to change. And we haven't really seen too much of the in possession stuff. I think in truth, there's not been a lot of focus on that, and hopefully that will come, because that's clearly, if there's one concern I would say out of all of the preseason games I would watch, is that they've not really created much in open play, and that clearly is something heading into the Championship that they will need to address and change. Albeit with the context, we've not seen Schlupp yet, we've not seen Chris Gordon yet, we've not seen Diallo yet. So there's still a lot to come, I think, in those attacking areas that will help with that process.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like so much has already been done, Connor, but with 10 days, or well, not even that, until the start of the new season, it feels like there's still lots that will happen and that will get done. I guess just finally, what are your expectations for this season? So difficult to kind of pinpoint that, but the overarching theme I've sensed listening to Manning and Napa and the Atanasios and yourselves interviewing various people is that there is an expectation within the club this season to achieve. And look, there was a slight kind of shadow over Johannes, because he deemed it unfair with his sacking, and that he kind of had achieved what he'd set out to do. And the club clearly disagreed with that. Regardless of where we finish, it feels like the expectation has been set and it's clear what the objectives are this season, and that is top 6. They are wanting to really push on. And look, if we finish 8th and performances are improved, will anyone get sacked? Probably not. But it does feel as if that they are putting some internal pressure on achieving this season. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I do. I don't think you make the moves that they have either in the dugout or on the pitch if there isn't that expectation and that ambition. I think first and foremost, and you never want to start here, but I will start here, is that there's not much room for manoeuvre now for Ben Napper. You would think it kind of has to be a season where the measure is progress, right? Because if, as you say, I think if they end the season as a better football team but aren't in the top six, and it feels like the kind of momentum is with them, and Liam Manning actually has built a team over the course of the season that has improved and got better and has ended the season really strongly with a really good run of form and kind of tangible signs that you can say, okay, I can see where in year 2 they could really kick on. I think that probably would be enough, but clearly the aim is to try and get in that top 6. Whenever Norwich are in the Championship, as Ben Napper, Zoe Webber and Mark Atanasio have said, the aim's got to be promotion. So you start there, and then it's about maybe how things go as the season goes. What you can't kind of account for is injuries or bad runs of form. What I would say is I think it's always hard at this stage, but you look at the fixture list and it feels like it's not the worst. There's not really a run of form where I'm thinking, blimey, December, for example, December is going to be really tough. You just don't have that. So yeah, that to me feels like the aim. It's progress. It's trying to keep themselves in touch with that top 6, and it's to try and be probably a little bit more consistent and a better footballing team than they were last year. And if they do that, I think by all accounts that would be success. For some, clearly for others, it will be, as you say, very binary of they've got to get themselves in the top 6. And I look across the league. I know there's maybe a feeling that it's going to be a slightly stronger Championship, and maybe I'll look really silly in a few weeks, and it is an insanely strong league. But I'm just not seeing that in the same way that people are. So I think there is an opportunity for them if they can get it right. And let's hope they can, because as you said, I think the potential of what could be achieved here is really exciting. You just hope that potential becomes, reality, because I think too often last season it probably didn't.
There we go. Connor, thanks so much as always. It's going to be an exciting season, regardless of what happens. Lots of new faces, lots of new players, lots of new chants in the terraces. Can't wait to get started. We shall catch up very soon. Thanks very much, mate.